はピンクの私は悪党をやっつける正義の変身ヒロイン日本の常識ってやつ
Okay, anyone else want to see her and Akiba Red team up? Since this is our first episode review, we may as well look at the show's first opening, and instead of coming out in 2006, it felt like something right out of the 90s. With some very on-the-nose visuals for the lyrics, though those same lyrics didn't quite match up with the themes of the show, and of course included a ton of stuff we wouldn't see in the actual anime. And I'm not gonna lie, I kind of love it. I don't know, maybe it's just my nostalgic bias talking, but I just love how almost indulgent this opening is with its cheesiness, and yet still managed to put in a ton of personality. I mean, just look at how much the girls' happy expressions change as their rogues gallery photobomb their picture. It's great stuff that, right off the bat, also helps to establish the more laid-back, kind of satirical nature of this show. And again, in spite of coming out in the 2000s when we were starting to move away from these sorts of openings to more stylized stuff, the fact that this is meant to be a parody of the sort of golden age of magical girl anime makes it work perfectly here. Going into the show proper, we get right into things. Yes, much like the original, we're kind of starting in the middle of the series. Granted, we will start to get the origin story of this team in the latter half of this episode as opposed to kind of in the middle of the season or in a movie, but it is still a little bit jarring. As such, I'll hold off on the usual character introductions, except for this character who we may as well get out of the way now, the mayor. By the way, much like my old Jean-Mal Doremi reviews, I'm not taking a look at the English dub of the series. From what I've heard, they did a lot of unnecessary changes, in particular not giving the girls civilian names, which will be important as we'll soon see. And really, unless the mayor is voiced by Tom Kenny, I have no reason to switch languages. Anyway, the non-SpongeBob mayor called to inform them that the mojo of this series was attacking a primary school, thus they had to deploy the girls, and we got the first group transformation of this season. And yeah, I'll just say right now, it's a lot of fun. While we will see their more complete individual transformations later, I will say I like how each of the girls suit up in ways that match up with their general personalities and motifs. And while I do kind of wish there were some more unique touches to each of their costumes, these are still great designs that again call back to the OG, but are properly more fashionable with vests which do look better than the jackets they were originally going to go with. And of course, their transformation trinkets were pretty unique, combining the standard magical girl compact, which we will see make a return to the Precure franchise very soon, but also combined it with a belt a la Kamen Rider. The fact that this is a 3-component system with the compact, the belt, and a ring that activates it all kind of gives me Kamen Rider Drive vibes, which I like a lot. Though strangely, as toyetic as all of this is, I haven't been able to find any listings for this stuff. Maybe I wasn't looking hard enough, but I also get the feeling that these things were way too complex and would have cost toy manufacturers more than they were willing to spend for, to be fair, an unproven property. Pity, because again, this feels like it would have made for a great precursor to Drive. Perhaps another day, Berto-san. The girls made their way to the primary school where Mojo enacted his truly devious plan of
That makes sense to me.
Yeah, this monkey ain't too bright. And before anyone tries to correct me and says he's an ape and not a monkey, that's not the case here. Yes, OG Mojo was a chimpanzee originally, but as we'll see later, the Z version of the primate was made from a macaca monkey, which also does justify his lower intelligence when compared to the original, as while macaca are considered to be one of the smartest species of monkeys, they are still below chimps who have near human intelligence. Also, fun fact, Craig McCracken said that his original inspiration for Mojo came from the antagonist of the classic tokusatsu Spectre Man with Dr. Gory. So in some ways, you could say they've come full circle, even though again, monkey, not ape. Still, to this Mojo's credit, he did understand the value of a celebrity's autograph on the secondary market and tried to get some from the girls. They of course refused, leading into our first fight of the series that involved everything, and I mean everything, you'd expect from an anime version of the PPG, including Mojo commanding some donut rice balls, improbable attacks that involved a lot of spitting and bubbles, and a little property damage.
Dude,
compared to the OGs, this is the equivalent of a single broken window. As the fight went on, it became clear that the girls were running low on stamina. We'll get more into the power sets of these girls compared to the OG later, but for now, they decided to refuel with a little ice cream, which everyone decided to join in on, including Mojo. And if that weren't enough, they even advertised the exact flavors they were all eating. Okay, do y'all have a sponsorship with that shop or something? And how do I get one? Yeah, let's also not forget, this is written by the guy behind Car Rangers, where these sorts of random cutaways were definitely more than a little commonplace in that show. Anyway, after finishing off their frozen treats, they just as quickly finished off Mojo and rescued everyone at the primary school. With that, the first half of the episode ended, and we would finally get into the girls' origin story after the commercial break. Professor Utonium Hitazawa and his son Ken were doing work in their lab. Yeah, in this continuity, not only does the prof have a full name, but also a son. This little addition kind of negated his motivation to create the PBG, not taking into account time travel shenanigans. They did still have some chemical X just lying around, but were actually trying to experiment with it rather than throwing a ton of weird ingredients, mostly sugar by the looks of the everything nice part of the recipe. However, Ken's robotic dog Peach ended up doing their job for them by throwing a sweet bun into the chemicals. This didn't result in the creation of homunculi of those chemicals, but it did increase the substance's potency to the point that they decided to reclassify it as Chemical Z. And it couldn't have come at a better time, as a giant iceberg was just kind of making its way towards the city. Well, at least the prince will be happy. Deciding to take matters into his own hands, Ken tried to destroy the ice by using a laser powered by the Chemical Z. It worked, but it also ended up releasing several black lights that had been sealed inside of the ice. Again, writer of a Sentai, you could try opening a jar of mayonnaise and chances are good you're going to release an eldritch abomination. It also released a few white lights that made their way towards the girls as well as Peach. Oh, so this is where Calamon ended up after the end of Tamers. With that, we finally got to some proper introductions for this series' version of the girls, starting with Momoko Akatsutsumi. And yes, the PPG of this series had civilian identities and some slightly different personalities. Should we really classify this as a parody if it's not that far removed from actual magical girl leads? Though, compared to the egotistical genius Blossom, this sweet-toothed and love-obsessed Momoko was far removed from her source material, but she did trade the IQ for something more valuable in the long run, as we'll soon see. One thing that did remain consistent with all of the girls, really, was their strong sense of morality, as Momoko protected a random girl and her yo-yo. This resulted in her transformation sequence just kind of happening, and her not really questioning it, and her not even questioning it until all was said and done. This pattern repeated with the remaining two, so we moved on to the Bubbles, Miyako Kotokuji, the popular rich girl of their school. In some ways, you could argue she was far more intelligent and mature than the original, though I would counter that by saying that the original did have her moments.
And finally, Bubba. Huh? Well, I'll be darned.
Plus, let's not forget, she knew Japanese and Spanish, so yeah, she did the idiot protagonist trope better than some. Anyway, Miyako was definitely more obsessed with fashion, as she was on her way home from the clothing store when the second white light almost hit a kid playing with bubbles. Yeah, interestingly enough, each of the girls got powers based off of the object they were touching just as the light hit them. So it's sort of like the ooze from TMNT with a little less body horror. This was shown to kids. Lastly was, of course, the buttercup of the team, Kaoru Matsubara. She was probably the closest to the original tomboy of the team, probably even more so as not only did she manage to amass some female groupies, remember this was kind of a sister series to Precure, but also... Well, on the bright side, you're just wearing a leotard. Granted, you shouldn't be showing it off as much as a certain Roman emperor. Meanwhile, civilians were running away from the zoo as the Mojo Jojo of the series had just been created thanks to one of the aforementioned black lights and was releasing all of the animals. Yeah, forget the wild animals for a minute. Why are you snatching up a little girl like that, dude? However, Mojo's priorities kind of shifted after he got whiff of Momoko's sweets. This led into a brief Oreo tutorial of all things before the two started butting heads and listing off each other's tropes. From there, we got chronologically the first fight of the series between Momoko and Mojo. And yeah, between this and the earlier fight in the episode, it was clear that Toei's animation budget wasn't going to this magical girl anime. And yet, it was still kind of charming in all of its low quality-ness. Again, this fight only really happened because these two acknowledged they had to follow through with their assigned tropes. It doesn't need to be taken that seriously. On top of that, even if the overall animation is pretty bad, some of these sequences are pretty decent. Like seriously, how many times have you seen a magical girl get ragdoll like this? Anyway, the fight eventually ended thanks to some conveniently placed oranges, and Momoko returned the animals to the zoo. However, she still had to answer for all the property damage she had caused.
Here, have a fat-free yogurt.
With that, the episode ended with all of the girls wandering the city, and the father and son professors realizing they needed to have a word with them. Before we get to the closing thoughts, we'll also take a look at the first ending theme of this series, and yeah, I think it pretty much shares most of my opinions regarding the opening. It has lyrics that really don't match up with the themes of this show, being about a girl sneaking out for a date with her boyfriend, but again, the very cheesy tone of it all, plus the girls and their rogues gallery putting on some very fashionable outfits, act as a nice cool down after the absolute randomness of this first episode. And yeah, that's probably the best way to describe this first episode. It's random and kind of unfocused even for what's meant to be a parody of the magical girl genre. And yet, through its very colorful designs and characters, I think they managed to develop a charm all its own that not only managed to attract some dedicated fans of the original, but also some casuals who just wanted a fun little show. While I did bring up multiple comparisons to the original series, it wasn't to really downplay this anime, but more to illustrate how it found its own identity, which was even kind of established in this team's origins. Obviously, they were nowhere near as powerful as the originals, which makes sense, as while Kimiko Z is allegedly more powerful than X, these girls are still mostly human, as opposed to the originals who are mostly made up of Chemical X. As such, the actual threat levels in this show are far more minimal. This is fine, as it also leaves room for more character-based material like getting to know the girls more individually, as well as some good satirical dialogue. I meant it when I said that this does feel a lot like the Akiba Ranger equivalent of a magical girl anime, with the first encounter with Mojo perfectly capturing the tropey nature of every magical girl's first fight. Yes, said fight wasn't anything spectacular, in fact much of this episode had some pretty sloppy animation, and yet there was just so much personality and stuff like the characters' expressions that it didn't bother me too much. I do kind of wish we could have gotten more from this first episode. That false start feels rather needless in the grand scheme of things, but for what it was, this was a fine start to something that would become one of the most fun magical girl anime of the 2000s. As I've stated previously, these reviews will alternate with my Ojamajo Doremi reviews, which will be returning next week. Sorry to those who want me to cover both shows in a week, but honestly, I'd rather work on some longer videos. Plus, I do want to leave some wiggle room in case I want to do some quick spur-of-the-moment extra videos like I've been doing for the past few weeks. Still look forward to all of that, and until then though, farewell for now my friends, and uh-oh, I recognize that theme music. Good thing I bought these the other day.